Welcome. Welcome to our press conference this morning. My name is Jutta. I'm with the World Rainforest Movement, one of the 12 organizations who initiated the No to Nature-Based Solutions statement last year, which we are happy to share with you today after 364 organizations from across the globe signed the statement. I'll say a few words about why we got together to launch this statement, this message of raising the alert on nature-based solutions as a dangerous deception that will get us deeper into climate chaos, rather than what's alluded the solution. After I have presented to you our speakers, I will be joined on the panel this morning by 3 speakers: Soumya Dutta from India, and Valère Pefouka and his colleague, the president of the Association of Communities in Mayumba in the south of Gabon, who will speak about a large nature-based solutions project in the south of Gabon, the Grand Mayumba project, and Kirtana Chandrasekaran from Friends of the Earth International, who will talk about how nature-based solutions are being promoted in a variety of international fora, and where we risk seeing less action to avoid climate chaos rather than more. So with that, a few words about the declaration and the why of the initiative for this declaration. For the last perhaps 4 or 5 years, we have perceived a large uptake of corporate interest in nature-based solutions. A very nice sound is deceptively, in fact, nice sounding a term that suggests that the solution to the climate crisis can be found in nature, whereas we are all very aware that the solution to avoiding climate chaos is firstly and squarely in ending fossil fuel burning. Instead of seeing progress towards an end to industrial forest fossil fuel burning, we are seeing corporations joined by large international nature conservation organizations promoting and peddling a very dangerous deception, which is called nature-based solutions. There is nothing of a solution in there. We fear that nature-based solutions will turn into nature-based dispossessions, because we are already seeing a first round of deals being promoted that mean forest-dependent communities, peasant farmers, communities in the global south are seeing their lands being taken, sealed off from them, and their activities and access being restricted to enable corporations to claim the carbon stored in the forests as a way of compensation for their continued greenhouse gas emissions. To name just one, the energy company Eni presented its plan to continue fossil fuel burning up to 2050 and use 90% of its, or for 90% of its energy production, use fossil fuels up to 2050. That's a massive amount of greenhouse gases that will still be released in the atmosphere if any were to go ahead with the plan, and at the same time pretending to claim carbon neutrality despite the continued fossil fuel burning. The carbon neutrality any would achieve by buying carbon credits, around 40 million credits a year. To give you an idea of that, it would mean any taking claim of all the carbon absorption capacity of the forests in Italy, a massive amount. And the company already is buying large amounts of carbon credits from RED nature-based solutions projects in Southern Africa, particularly one project in Zambia. And just to give you an idea how many other ENIs are out there and how big the scale is or the risk is for a large land grab as a result to fossil fuel, to corporate commitments for nature-based solutions. With those and those that concern for a massive land grab in the offing was a very big reason for us as organizations to support it. Community and peasant struggles for access and rights to their land, to get together and say very clearly and very loudly no to nature-based solutions, because they're not a solution to the climate crisis. They will speed up climate chaos. They're not a solution to biodiversity crisis either, where we also see nature-based solutions being promoted. On the contrary, nature-based solutions will lead to more corporate control over large expanses of land. And as I said, we will hear from two speakers what that means in reality, from Soumya Jutta about the Bhumitra carbon offset scheme in India, which signs up small peasant farmers and makes available large amounts of data to the corporate industry. And we'll hear from Valère Pefouka and the president of the Association of Communities and in Haute and Banio about the large nature-based solutions project in preparation and in part already running in the south of Gabon, the Grand Mayumba project. With that, I would like to pass the word to Soumya, and maybe you can say a few words about yourself and the organizations you're with. Soumya has monitored and followed the carbon market in India for many, many years, has visited a large number of carbon offset projects across India and is very familiar and has documented very widely the justice implications of those carbon offset projects across India. With that, Soumya, the word is yours. The floor is yours.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon from different parts, friends from different parts of the world. I am Shoma Dutta and I'm a part of the Friends of the Earth India as a collective, but I am also part of a large network called MOSA, that is Movement for Advancing Understanding on Sustainability and Mutuality. And I am also co-convener of South Asian People's Action on Climate Crisis, or SAPAC. I'll talk about the Bhumitra project because this is most recent, but what kind of advances through NBS is being done in our kind of countries where large number of very small farmers, which we call marginal and small farmers with less than 2 hectares of holding, and that is 85% of Indian farming families are, their holdings are less than 2 hectares. So what impacts they are having and what impacts people dependent on forest resources, which is roughly around 24% of India's 1.4 billion population, they are having. Let me start with the Bhumitra project because this is being discussed. This is a very recent project, but let me also clarify this Bhumitra funded or supported or proposed project is very recent. So the outcomes will come in the next few years. I have been involved not as part of the project. I was invited for suggestions, comments as an outside independent expert. And what I heard, I strongly sort of advised them against the problems. But what I heard is also, even in the initial stages, is alarming. This project proposes to what they call aggregate, what we call herding together. It's like herding a lot of sheep, herding together lots of small farmers. In India, you have hardly any big farms, as I said, except in a few pockets, very small pockets. So they are proposing, this work has already started on the ground, but this is very new. They are aggregating large number of small and marginal farmers. And all of us know the difficulties of estimating soil carbon, organic soil carbon in individual plots. So what Bhumitra proposes to do is using satellite monitoring to estimate, very rough estimate of the soil or carbon content of the plots, and based on that compensate the farmers. There are already murmurs about what kind of, there were questions raised, who are the buyers, who will be the buyers of these carbon credits, when, as and when these carbon credits supposedly come up. There are many other ifs and buts where the carbon credits really do materialize, but that's in the future, it's the near future. But when we raise this question that who are going to be the buyers, and when this NGO, who is acting as the local organizer for bringing thousands of farmers together, when this question was raised to Bhumitra and their funders, including Chevron Foundation, obviously that's the interest is very clear. The connection of interest is very clear, as Jutta said, that their emissions are supposed to be offset, which never happens. So already there were a very clear indication from Bhumitra that they are not going to compromise on who is going to buy, who is not going to sell, who they are not going to sell. So those kind of ethical conditions are out of the bounds of either the Indian partner or anyone in fact. The second very problematic approach is that, as I said, they are very clearly saying that they know that individual plot-based measurements are very difficult. So they are going to do the satellite measurement, satellite monitoring and rough estimation. In India, there is already a trend, and these three trends are converging. One, the government of India, as you have seen, our Prime Minister has already said that in Glasgow, that India will reduce its projected carbon emission by 1 billion tons, projected CO2 emission. There is already in Paris, India committed to 2.5 to 3 gigatons of carbon sequestration, forestation. So this fits into even the corporate agenda in India. There is already a big push for digitization of small farmers' fields data. And this data digitization, first digitization, and then centralization of this database is extremely difficult. But the carbon market is playing here as an agent, as a facilitator of basically collecting lots of very micro level data of individual smallholder farmers, getting their sort of nerves, and whatever their fields need, whatever their fields conditions are. And this is becoming for all other sectors of which have interests in agriculture, corporatization of agriculture, against which a massive farmer struggle happened in India recently, as most of you might be aware of. So this digitization and centralization of farmers' data is also one of the avenues being provided by this Bhumitra project. There is already another problem in the contracts. Though I am clarifying, I am not in the inner circle. I am not part of this. And obviously, I don't have access to the details of the contracts being signed. But there are already questions raised. And they have said, no, the contracts has been...
Il y a de nombreuses questions qui sont soulevées.
What happened with this kind of so-called nature-based solution in not only for farming, not through soil carbon sequestration, but through forestation, through the earlier voluntary REDD+. There was, in Northeast India, Northeast India is heavily forested. Some where the indigenous people, which we call Adivasis, the headman was contacted, and there was an increasing amount
Soumya, the connection is breaking up. Perhaps you can disconnect the video to see if it works better then. Let's wait a second. We have lost Soumya. I'm sure he will try to reconnect in a second. He's given us already an indication of how large agribusiness is using the renewed interest in carbon offsetting to access data from small-scale farming and risk, which obviously risks a move towards control of peasant farming through large corporate industrial actors, some of the largest polluters and contributors to climate change, like we have seen in the previous slides that I briefly showed, which looked at a research by IATP, which looked at the largest European agribusiness companies and their contribution to climate crisis. They're amongst the largest emitters. And great, we have Soumya back. I am back to you, Soumya.
Sorry, my connection somehow got disturbed. So
glad to have you back.
Okay.
Perhaps, Soumya, you can disconnect the video because the connection is still not very good. Maybe you can turn off the video, it might help.
Right. So what I was saying is, in this project that we started, which was supposed to be the earliest carbon sequestration through forestry project in India, this is a place called Mawphlang in the state of Meghalaya. And there, in spite of the claims that this has given large amount of benefits to the communities, what we found from a comparatively small forest controlled by the clan headman and his family, it has expanded to around 37,000 hectares. Local people are
I think we have to be patient and give Soumya time to reconnect. That's the challenge we have.
That's the challenge. Sorry, in small cities, small towns in India. I'm not in Delhi now.
Indeed.
Sorry, I'll finish up quickly. So these people around this place, these are indigenous people, which we call Adivashis in the Northeast. One of them finally said, if I cannot cut a tree in my own land, it is no longer my land. So that kind of deprivation, lack of access, denial of access has happened as a result of carbon sequestration project. Then we found out in that same trip another project in a state called Mizoram, where the forest cover is claimed to be 86% of the state's total geographical area. It's there 400 square kilometers of forest very silently has gone under REDD+ project. The state government's Department of Environment and Forest has entered into some agreement with some European company that they refuse to tell us. And as a result, the village committees in the forested areas are very clearly told, this is the paltry amount of 5,000 rupees you are being given a year. Your responsibility is to put out fires. So you can understand if a fire happens, the carbon stock goes. So this kind of restrictions to access to their freedom is coming in. And I'll end by saying this, when we raise this question with this very recent project funded by Bhumitra in very densely populated area of India, the earlier two projects I referred to are very sparsely populated areas. The Bhumitra project is being operated in the peninsular Indian region, which is densely populated. Every hectare is being farmed there, almost, except the wilderness. So there we have gathered, aggregated thousands of farmers, and they are dictating what kind of transformation in their agricultural practices they have to do. They are dictating what kind of reporting they have to do. And that, of course, the NGO which is coordinating is helping out. They are saying we'll resist this outside intervention. But one last question that I will raise and leave is that, as we have seen this year, because of the La Nina impact, there's massive amount of rainfall till very late even in the winter. And in this kind of situation, soil carbon sequestration, which Bhumitra's selling point is soil carbon sequestration, increasing the soil carbon stock. The soil carbon stock is a very false indicator. In soil, the soil carbon flow is a much better indicator, because if you build up soil carbon and if the temperature rises as it is rising, and if there is more moisture, more rain, anoxic conditions, there is far more. It's very good news for soil microbes, but it's very bad news for emissions. It's not only carbon dioxide, it's also methane, which is in a shorter term 87 times as potent a greenhouse gas. So will they measure? As of now, they are not measuring. They are just about to measure the current static soil carbon stock. And that's a very false indicator unless you know what kind of soil carbon flow is happening in the soil, the microbes, the carbon, dead carbon stock, etc. This is again going to lead to not only a problem for climate, this is also going to lead to loss of freedom of the farmers. And this is going to lead to corporatization of agriculture, because all the data, micro level data of their nutrient, of their situation, of the moist soil moisture, everything will be in the hand of a few big corporations, which will be for sale. So this is a very dangerous situation. We should resist. Thank you very much. Thank you for bearing with my internet.
Thank you very much, Soumya, for this a very concerning picture into the reality of the Bhumitra carbon scheme in India. As you said, it's what's in the offing with schemes like Bhumitra is more restrictions, less freedom on peasant farming, very dodgy carbon measurements that may give us all a false sense of action taken to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and yet more concentration of massive amounts of data, crucial data for food production in the hands of very few corporations that already have a massive control over food production globally. I'm very happy to see our colleagues from Gabon have been able to join us. Welcome, Valère, Pefouka, resource person for Muyissi, Environnement, and Monsieur Benoit Mombo Moukagni, who is the president of the Association of the Communities who've come together to say no to the Grand Mayumba project, a project run as a joint venture by the government of Gabon and a company called African Conservation Development Corporation with the founder Alain Bernstein. He used to be associated with a company called Sustainable Forestry Management LLC, and in the carbon business with that company for many years. Their project, their joint venture, the Grand Mayumba project in Gabon, covers a concession that amounts to 3% of the country's land base. That's 3% of the country's land base, which gives you an indication of the size of land grabs that we are seeing being developed and emerging in the context of nature-based solutions. Let's see if our colleagues from Gabon are able to hear us and can join us to say, take 10 minutes or so to talk about the reality of the Grand Mayumba project and why the communities in the region came together to say very clearly no to nature-based, no to the Grand Mayumba project. Jean Valère, je passe la parole. J'espère que vous nous...
I will give you the floor. I hope you can hear us.
Vous écoute pas encore. We
can't hear you.
No, we can't hear you yet. Now,
Jutta.
yes, wonderful. Yes, please go
Hello.
ahead. Yes, hello, the floor is yours.
Ah là, ok. Bonjour.
Good morning. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you well. On vous écoute très bien.
Ah ok,
Yes, we can
d'accord.
hear you well. So this Grand Mayumba project has never been subject to public consultation as it is foreseen in Gabon law, and our communities have never been noticed or informed about this project. So today we have this information about the project because of the research from the national NGO called Muyissi Environnement with international partners. And therefore, we were surprised to find out that this forest concession of over 2,000 hectares that is being operated for the past 10 years will become a carbon credit market. So this is something that we are not familiar with. We don't know what benefit we will get from this. So we don't know anything about this carbon credit market. And so therefore, us communities who are impacted by the project have protested on the 5th and 6th of November 2021 during the days of climate action to say no to this project. So we've made a common statement called the community statement from Haute and Basse-Banio, the region. So it was targeted at our local authorities, but to date we haven't had no reply. So in a few days, we will get in touch with our administrative authorities with the support of an NGO in order to demand an answer to our statement, as we want to fight against this project, which will limit our activities on our own ancestral lands. So the situation is already difficult because of other projects that took place, with a marine park, especially a marine park that prevents us from fishing in our own seas. So life is we can't live in this context, and these nature-based solutions are detrimental to our communities. And I would like to say that today we've had mine extraction projects in the same areas, and we don't know the perimeter of this project exactly.
Ah, vous êtes là?
Oui, on vous
Are you still
écoute.
here? Yes, was listening to you. So as I was saying, within the same area, there is an oil company and a mining company that settled down 3 or 4 months ago. And locals are wondering what they're going to do. As it happened with logging, we've seen that with logging activities, and the same goes for mining activities. There's a company that goes to the forest every day and extracts raw material I'm not sure what they're looking for. Are they looking for gold or other materials?
Thank you for this very quick panorama of what the Grand Mayumba project means for communities. We have posted in the chat the links to the video about the manifestation of community organizations that communities organized in Mayumba last November. The project, and we will get to questions, so we'll note your questions and we'll have time for the questions at the end. We will note them, and because it was not very clear from every registration who is joining as journalist and who's joining as interested person, please indicate if you're a journalist. We will prioritize media questions at the end, and we'll make sure we have ample time.
Jutta,
Yes, we.
c'est le secrétaire général qui veut terminer là.
Okay.
Jutta, I would like to say that communities are being marginalized. So there has never been information provided to locals in the Basse-Banio, so we don't know what the companies are trying to extract to do in the Mayumba region. So, but we know what ONGs do worldwide. They're here to give us a direction, to help us find a way so that everything is done properly in our region.
We'll get back in the question session to the Grand Mayumba project. I already see a question in the chat. Thank you very much, Monsieur le Président de l'Association, Benoit and Jean Valère, for your sharing what the Grand Mayumba project already means and is going to mean once it gets implemented in full swing, and what the community concerns are based on their experience with an already existing marine protected area that has largely and significantly restricted artisanal fishing along the shore. And one part of the Grand Mayumba project proposed as a RED and nature-based solutions project is the expansion or the introducing a new protected area on land, where communities fear this will severely restrict their access to the land and their possibility to use the land as they have traditional rights to this area. I pass the word to our last speaker, Kirtana Chandrasekaran from Friends of the Earth International, who will talk about how nature-based solutions are pushed in different international fora, and again, why we are concerned about those developments. Kirtana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jutta. Yeah, my name is Kirtana Chandrasekaran, and I work for Friends of the Earth International, which is a global environmental justice federation. And we work very closely with small-scale food producers, but also indigenous peoples and other communities who are being very badly affected by these type of NBS projects. And I'm just going to talk, I'll try to be quick to leave time for questions. I'm going to talk a little bit about why we are launching this statement now. You know, why is it topical? And the reason is because we have seen in the last year or maybe 2 years, several policy and political developments made by governments and in international spaces that make us very concerned that these type of projects are going to massively expand. And you've heard just the impacts of 2 of them. And we think if this kind of global legislation is created, it's going to expand on a massive scale. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen, and I hope you can all see. Can you see the screen, everybody? Yes, I hope that's okay. Okay, so the first thing I want to say is that you know, the term NBS has been used for a long time, and people will say, you know, it's been in use since almost 2009 from different people like the World Bank and the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. But and people refer to it in all sorts of nice ways, you know, talking about disaster risk management, food security, health, climate adaptation. But right now, what we are seeing is that the overwhelming interest in nature-based solutions is in fact for carbon removal and carbon offsets. And that's where the real focus is, no matter what people are saying. And I will explain, and I'll show you how. What we are seeing is that the development of these type of carbon removal nature-based solutions project that Soumya and the others have been talking about is very closely linked to what governments and several corporations are calling their net zero pledges. Now, net zero is essentially, the net is the amount of carbon you emit minus the amount of carbon you can sequester or remove from the atmosphere. But obviously, as you've heard, how you remove carbon from the atmosphere is very contentious, whether it's possible at all to do that. And of course, the issue is 100 minus 100 is 0, and 10 minus 10 is also 0. So we cannot, it's pretty clear that we want, if we need to keep global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees, as the International Panel on Climate Change has said, that we need to stop burning fossil fuels, and we cannot keep emitting 50 years into the future and keep going. But that is what these projects are imagining. So with essentially what's happened in the last few years is you've seen many governments, but also corporations, turn down any plans of emissions reductions and turn up all their plans for trying to remove carbon from the atmosphere with these type of projects. And this is just some examples of all the different companies. There's over 1,500 corporations that have made net zero targets, several governments, all the governments. So I just want to talk a little bit about what have been the kind of policy developments in the last year or so that have made these. And I'll just do it in chronological order because it's across the spectrum of all the different aspects on food and biodiversity and climate. There was a food system summit last year in September 2021, where one of the so-called action tracks was to boost nature positive production for food systems. And again, when they were talking about this, you know, it was a lot of nice words, you know, the food production that's regenerative, that enhances biodiversity, that stops the destruction of natural resources, and all things that sound pretty good. But what we saw through the development of how the discussion on this nature positive solutions action track in the Food System Summit happened is that, first of all, towards the end of it, they started calling it nature-based solutions for food production. And you can assume that this was to start fitting it better into how nature-based solutions is being discussed now in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, but also the CBD and several other places. And they started to specify some of the projects that you could consider solutions under this action track. And I'm just going to give you a couple of examples. There are many of these on soils, because we've been discussing that, especially with the Bhumitra project. So if you look at what some of the proposals are for what these nature-based solutions should look like, you'll see here the emphasis is mine that I've added, but this is taken from some of the papers from the summit. It's essentially about soil carbon sequestration in order to generate and sell nature-based carbon credits for voluntary or global carbon markets. We don't know yet where they're going to go, but it's very closely linked to what we've been discussing. So it's in fact to contribute to the so-called net zero emissions, but also here you can see, so the first quote is from the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, which is a business coalition of the world's largest 100 corporations, but also Rabobank, which is the bank in the Netherlands. But here the second quote is from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, who started a new project called Rec Soil, which looks at enhancing soil carbon stocks but they see it as a feasible solution to offset global emissions, which is virtually impossible if we keep emitting at the rate that we're doing now. The second place, which is extremely important for us to look at, obviously, is the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement, where there were several developments that happened at the last COP26 in Glasgow. And what we saw there is that the whole theme of nature, for the first time, took on a huge persona and meaning at the last COP. It was one of the priorities of the UK presidency of the COP. This is the quote from their site on this. So they are very much seeing the pathway to net zero to include nature-based solutions, meaning using soil carbon, trees, and could be other things to draw down carbon from the atmosphere to achieve net zero. But we also saw some quite hard policy developments, concrete policy developments in the COP that we fear are massively opening, they will massively open the door to an expansion of these projects to fill these voluntary carbon markets. So the first thing is that finally in this COP, for those of you who are following it, you might know, but very controversial agreements on carbon markets, which have not been agreed for almost a decade, I think, were agreed at this COP. And for our purposes, one of the things that we saw is that in the carbon markets agreement that was made in November, they've agreed that carbon removals can also be considered in carbon markets, which means you can generate removal credits that will now fit these voluntary carbon markets. And just to give you an idea, so now it's opened the door to UN-based carbon markets, but just one of the voluntary carbon markets that's being developed in the UK is $100 billion carbon market, and that's just one. And there are countless these, and all the carbon markets are looking for these removals credits. And that's why we fear that these projects are going to hugely expand. The second place is that in actually what is called the Glasgow Climate Pact, which, it's just the framework agreement, where again, I don't need to read this out, where they are recognizing the contribution of nature and ecosystems in climate adaptation and mitigation. And now, while the words sound very nice, the important thing to note is that they are seeing them as sinks and reservoirs of greenhouse gases. So they're seeing nature, ecosystems, forests, marine ecosystems as sinks and reservoirs of greenhouse gases. And this again opens the door to a lot of climate finance going into these type of projects, which sound good because of course you can sequester carbon, but the likelihood is that they will go into really terrible land grabbing projects. The last place where we are seeing this development that's happening now, this week, today, tomorrow, and day after, which will be very, very important, is the Convention on Biological Diversity, which is, the meetings are taking place now, and the discussions on nature-based solutions there are happening today and tomorrow. And there has already been a lot of controversy about including that. Several Southern governments have been opposed to including any language on nature-based solutions in any of these meetings because of the fears that they have, because they're not very well defined. But what the issue that we are fighting now in the CBD, as they say, is the so-called Target 8, which is on nature-based solutions, where previously there was actually a language on nature-based solutions there. Now it's been removed, but as you can see here, they are expecting the CBD to contribute 10 gigatons of carbon dioxide removal per year to mitigation efforts. And this is hugely problematic because, of course, the CBD is the Convention to Protect Biodiversity. It is not the Convention on Climate Change. But here it is kind of linking those two so that protection measures undertaken through the CBD will also start to generate these type of carbon removal credits. And it will be an even bigger cause for, lock and chain methods of conservation and all the things that you've been talked about here. And I think, yeah, I would like to leave it there probably for the moment to get some good questions. The only thing that I would like to also mention that's important is that we are also seeing at the regional level and at the national level, many countries, legislation being made now to pursue these carbon removal credits. And a very notable one is in the European Union, which is agreeing at the moment under its Fit for 55 climate package to carbon removal pieces of legislation on restoring sustainable carbon cycles and the carbon removal certification mechanism, through which it is actually setting in place regulatory and legal mechanisms to allow carbon removals, carbon sequestration, soil carbon to become part of the way it achieves its net zero target. And again, once again, I don't need to say how this will, this is just from one regional body. The US has also done it. So we are very, very worried about what the implications will be now in the next few years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kirtana. With that, and a very quick panorama over the many different aspects of concerns that we have about nature-based solutions and at the multiple risks that are ahead if nature-based solutions continue to be pushed further. I open the floor to questions. I have one from Laurence Carmel from Le Monde, who would like to know about the concrete and precise impacts of the Grand Mayumba project on communities already, and how many people are already affected by the Grand Mayumba project. I will check with Laurent, with Jean Valère and Benoit, if you have been able to get the translation, and please take the floor to say something about the impact of the Grand Mayumba project already, and perhaps also where you see the future risk of the project. For a background, the Grand Mayumba project, part of the Grand Mayumba project is already in operation, a logging concession that has been extracting timber from a nature-based solutions project for almost 10 years now. And in violation of the law, the company has not been negotiating agreements with the affected communities for benefits as foreseen and requested by the country's forest legislation. The large concern by the community, however, is the expectation that as part of the Grand Mayumba project, a large protected area will be set up inside the concession area, which would lead to significant restrictions on community use of that land. Jean Valère, Benoit, the floor is yours about the impacts that communities already feel and the concerns you have going into the future with the Grand Mayumba project. While, can you hear us in Mayumba?
Yes.
And you have,
Yes, we can hear you.
No.
Ah, okay.
No. Apparently there is a problem with translation. So there was a question on the impact perceived by local communities around this Grand Mayumba project. So what's the impact as of today, and what risks do you perceive for the future with the Grand Mayumba project, and the reason why you protest against this project. So can you tell us about the concrete impact that you've already experienced and your concerns about the future? And you can take the floor, maybe like we can have someone that acts as a support if we have some technical problems with the translation. So I'll give you the floor back. So the difficulties that we experience with this Grand Mayumba project is that it's a long-lasting project. We've heard about this for years, and up until now we've had nothing concrete. And so the latest information we got came as a surprise. There was about 4,000 cubic meters that have been cut in the past 2 years. And we can see that it can't work. They've promised to open factories, but since they've settled in, nothing has changed. And we've just heard that there is a team of workers that will have to go on leave, and we don't know why exactly. And so this can't happen without the authorization from the labor inspector normally. The population doesn't benefit from this project, obviously, and there are some information missing. So this is the reason why we want your support, because you have some expertise. So maybe you can provide us with some guidance. Can I say something more? Yes, please. So Grand Mayumba project takes place in Alianza region, which is in the southwest of Gabon. So this province, it's about 30,000 inhabitants. And this project is in the Mayumba city. And there are 3 or even 4 departments affected. You have Basse-Banio region, the Haute-Banio department as well, in which you have the forest concession. You have the Congo department, where the agri-business project of sugarcane will take place, and you have the Muyissi, where you have the capital of this region. So it's about 30,000 inhabitants. In Mayumba, you have about 6,000 inhabitants. And 2,000 in Haute-Banio, and in Mayongo, I have about 2,000 as well. So the difficulty that we have is that this project, and it was told by the communities earlier, that communities were never consulted for this project. So they had no information whatsoever. There was no answer to their questions. And under Gabonese law, for such projects of such magnitude, communities have to be informed. This was not the case. What is even more worrying about this project is that they didn't say that it was a project based on carbon credit. No one speaks about that. No administrative authorities say it. And what we know is that it's a project on forest exploitation. This was a project delivered to a multinational company, and the communities who are aware of this, what this permit is, know that there's always been forest activities in this part of forestry activity. And but this is a way of luring communities. It is they're basically exploiting the people there, and so this is a company that does carbon credit. First, they farm this forest, and you can see the abuse here from these multinational. So they want to do carbon credit, but they first cut the most important trees, and therefore, and this has started in 2011, 2012. So this is what I could add to what was earlier said. In our NGO, through our partnership with the international movement, the World Forest International Movement, we were there to help them. And we told them that there will be this activity in their place, and the communities there are widely affected by all of the different projects. You have Park Mayumba Park, for example, and there's another park on the continent called Mukalamba Dudu Project. And there's another park as well. So all the communities in this province are greatly impacted by these three projects. And with all the restrictions that they have in forest management, how can they deal with this project related to carbon credits with the conservation laws, that the principles that would be applied?
Thank you very much, Ladislas, for that's the connection, also showing how we increasingly see nature-based solutions projects turning to a way of financing the very controversial expansion of protected areas. And as we've heard, protected areas that restrict largely already community use of forests. And as we've seen or heard from Ladislas and then from Muyissi and Environnement, the Grand Mayumba project, the project that has been extracting timber, causing greenhouse gas emissions for a decade, not fulfilled its legal obligation, now hoping to cash in on the carbon market under the banner of nature-based solutions, restricting communities by expanding protected areas in the part of the country where communities are already reeling under the impact of protected areas. I have several more questions, and we're up for time also already, so let me do a quick last round of questions for Kirtana on the UN developments. There's from Ludovic Drapier, a question for Kirtana: what do you make of the adoption of the nature-based solutions definition at the UN conference in Nairobi recently? How do you think that will impact the further developments in the UN arenas on nature-based solutions? And a question from Marco Kaiser, also for Kirtana and related. In one of the 21 targets, the CBD expresses how preserving natural ecosystems stores carbon. In what different ways should the CBD make the link between biodiversity and climate change? And there is a third one from Diane Rangan, connected. If not carbon offsets, what do you see as an alternative? Kirtana, do you want to have a go at those? And maybe if we can ask the interpreters for 5 more minutes, and we'll wrap up. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll have a go at those, and then if anybody else wants to, I think all really important questions. I think the question of Ludwig, I didn't bring that up just now, but yes, indeed. So there was a resolution on nature-based solutions that was agreed. I think that's what you're referring to at the United Nations, UNEA. Sorry, I can't find your question, but I think that's what you must be referring to. And in fact, that was pushed by the European Union which is pushing this concept of nature-based solutions in all their different spaces. We're expecting them to do the same now in the CBD, to reintroduce the language there. And this resolution, I think the most worrying aspect of it is, of course, the political signals that the European Union is going to use its, kind of tough power, political lobby power to bring this into all the spaces. But then also they have agreed somehow a definition of nature-based solutions in that resolution. It's also very vague. I have it here somewhere. I'll paste it in the chat. It's again, what we call in the UK, motherhood and apple pie. It says lots of nice things without saying anything. It's a very vague definition. But now that they have the definition there, they can argue. So far, a lot of the global South developing countries have said NBS does not have any precedence in the UN system. We don't want to accept it. We don't know what it means. It's not the same as others. And now there is somehow this definition agreed. So that's certainly going to be, it's going to make things more difficult, I think. And it's definitely a signal of what the European Union is going to do, I think, now in the future. And I already mentioned they have their own legislation to do that. About the CBD question, yes, indeed. So there is this target 8, which is about the linkages between climate and biodiversity. And obviously the IPBES panel, which is the Scientific Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, has recognized that obviously climate change makes biodiversity loss much worse. So there's lots of different connections. So I think we would want to see, the linkages made in a couple of more beneficial ways. One is that there is an important role for the CBD to address the drivers of deforestation, address emissions from all the sources, so industrial agriculture and factory farming, and stop the drivers of deforestation, which will contribute to both biodiversity goals, but then obviously is a huge contribution to stopping carbon emissions. There is a contribution that the CBD can make in conserving, obviously, natural forests, peatlands, wetlands. But the main purpose of that would be, of course, to protect, restore, and enhance biodiversity and protect the rights of indigenous people and local communities who are living on those. Of course, they do have a benefit then for addressing climate change. So I think both of those things can be recognized without giving the CBD, without mentioning a gigaton number of what the CBD should be contributing to carbon mitigation measures, because that is not the role of the CBD. And what the worrying part of this is that we see across all the spaces that actually, although nature-based solutions, they claim it's to bring nature and biodiversity back into the conversation on climate, what it's really doing is utilizing nature in a very utilitarian way, in a very single-minded way, but also doing the same for all the local biodiversity protection measures that indigenous people are doing, and using that for carbon removal purposes, which potentially will also contribute to carbon markets. So that's the kind of difference, and there are ways to do that. I hope that answers your question. Sorry, I can't, maybe somebody else can answer any of the questions. I forgot the last one. Was it about the Brazil?
The last one, yes, the last one was the alternatives, and maybe I can wrap up with commenting on or responding to the question from Samlima Lamdoir, which goes also in that direction of saying, isn't there a risk of throwing out the baby with the bathwater by saying no to nature-based solutions? And isn't it an issue of communities needing to be involved in and benefit from the projects? Let me say that after almost 20 years of following carbon markets and 15 years of very closely monitoring and documenting the reality of reduced emissions from deforestation and forest degradation projects and what they mean for communities in a large number of countries, I can tell you that I haven't seen offset projects that benefit communities. Where they do, it's small pennies in comparison to the large financial benefits that the companies that put in place those offset projects receive. But more importantly, each and every carbon offset project, at the very best, will end in a zero increase of greenhouse gas emissions. And I say at the very best. In reality, the very overwhelming part of carbon credits that are being sold are empty hot air credits that are not backed up by a true and additional emission reduction. And the consequence of that, of course, is we're being left with a very dangerous deception that greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere are being compensated when they're not. And the consequence of that is more and more rapid climate chaos, a damage from climate change. So for that reason, the organizations that brought out this statement do not believe that it's an issue of throwing a baby out with the bathwater, but an issue of saying the time for offsets, if there ever was one, is over. If we are serious about avoiding climate breakdown, because what is needed is a drastic reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and an end to fossil fuel burning. And what we have seen with the carbon market since it got underway, with RED and now with the new brand of RED, nature-based solutions, is that all of these are initiatives to delay what must not be delayed any further, and that is an end to fossil fuel burning and a drastic reduction of greenhouse gas emissions starting in the industrialized countries, where we obviously have a much larger responsibility for the crisis that we're in. With that, I know there are probably still many.
Sorry, Jutta, Soumya, maybe Soumya wanted to respond. He has his hand up. Maybe he can.
Okay, Soumya, brief.
If I can just very quickly. See, I think this question of alternative is actually diverting in any case, because whenever you are talking about very clearly stopping emission, it's now and today. Every sequestration project is talking about a time scale of years, decades. And as IPCC reports are saying, very conservative reports, we don't have those years and decades to wait for emissions to come down. So those are really, even if they work, those are not solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Soumya. With that, I thank everybody and would like to end today's press conference with words of condolence for our colleagues at GRAIN who have lost their colleague, Carlos Vincente, very unexpectedly yesterday. Hank, René, Devlin, Ange, Partini, Larissa, Aitor. We feel with you, our thoughts are with you, our heartfelt condolences, and we will miss Carlos, and we're sure you will miss him too. Strength for those hard days, and our thoughts will be with you in this difficult moment. With that, I end today's press conference. The recording will be available, and if you have difficulty to get in touch with any of the speakers, feel free to get in touch with me. I've put the contacts in the chat and will connect you where needed. Thank you very much for joining this press conference today.